Hello, welcome. So in this video we're going to take a look at a few of the features in Harmony for drawing, painting, and creating our character. So I want to start out first with just remembering that under preferences we do want to make sure that focus on mouse enter is selected. So that's going to be a key one that we are going to care about. Later on, when it comes time to animation, we'll be starting with, we want stop motion keyframes, not motion keyframes by default. So I already have that selected from prior. So now I'll click OK. So we can see as I move from window to window, the red box indicates what is the active window available to me. So right now, if I work with my pencil tool and sketch, of course, we can make our brush bigger and smaller, or our pencil in this case bigger or smaller by holding down O and then dragging. And I'm going to make it bigger here just to show some things about this. So as we change the size, we can work with it. If I go under View, Show, choose Show Strokes, it's going to show where that stroke is, the center point of that line that I am drawing. So it's now giving me that information. If I want to adjust what I'm doing, I can double click on the icon for it, and I could say let's really start exaggerating the ends of that stroke. So now if I'm drawing with a tablet, I can really get that pressure sensitivity working out. If I just draw with a consistent pressure, we can see, but if I press hard or light, so it's like the paintbrush, it does give me that variation. If I don't want that, if I want it to be consistent no matter how hard I press, so no matter what I do, it's always giving me the same stroke, I can do that. So now each one of these strokes, every time I draw, it's now creating a stroke. And one thing it's doing is it's actually flattening these strokes. So if I go and select something, we can see how it's joining those points. So if I go here, it joined where the lines overlapped. So if the lines didn't overlap, it keeps it separate. But when the lines overlap, it now joins. We can see it's adding in those extra points. And that's a feature that with the pencil tool we don't notice as often, but with the paintbrush tool we'll see more frequently. And that's because in this case I have chosen to flatten my artwork. So it's auto flattening the artwork as I draw. So if I draw a line, and if I draw another line and it crosses, it adds in that point. Now if I turn off auto flatten, if I draw a line and draw a line, we can see, well, they're joining again as well. So that line is there, this line is here, but now these two lines are joined. So again, I will select everything, just clean house a little bit. So if I draw one line and draw two lines going across it, and currently I have auto flatten off, now I'll draw one line, two lines across it. Well, I meant to turn it on before repeating that. Draw a line, two lines across it. So now when I select it, that line is separate, and well, so now those points are separate. But if I go here, it's all one unit. So we can see there they're separate. Here it's joined. So that's the difference when we use auto flatten. Now with the paint tool, that becomes even more apparent. So let's see my paintbrush. I'll turn off auto flatten. Let's get a big fat brush just to get the point across quickly. So if I draw a shape, draw a shape, draw a shape. So it looks like I've created a solid red area. Now I'm going to turn on auto flatten and repeat that same process. And now if I use my select tool and select, we'll see those are all different shapes. Let's just change the color a little bit more so it's easier to see the distinction of what's happening. So we can see each one is a different shape. Here, it's all one continuous shape. So auto flatten merges it. So if you don't have auto flatten on while you're painting, it can create a mess later when you're trying to select things. The good part about it is now when I am working with my select tool, so if I did paint it this way, I can still always go into my select tool options and choose flatten, and it now merges that together. So it's not like if you do it, you're stuck or screwed and you're like, oh no, now I have to do it all over again. Well, woe is me. No, that's not the case. So auto flatten is a great way of working. Now, the paintbrush, we're going to look at some other features on this as well, and we can see where we have some other options. So we can choose draw behind, autofill. So if I were to, with the paintbrush, draw a shape, so it's auto filling it. Now, oh, got to select autofill, duh. And now we can see how it filled it. And it's flat, so we don't have any. Let's use this color, the pink. It's easier to see if there's extra lines showing up. Now, I'm going to turn off autofill. I'm going to turn on paint behind. Now, normally when paint behind is off, if I, let's go grab a different color, we'll grab green. So if I go here, now that green sits on top of the pink. If I turn on paint behind, this is a really easy way to effectively kind of paint within the line. So you can see how it now kept my original lines. It didn't cover them. It's painting that shape behind it. Now if I select it to see what's there, we can see that that is what it made. Now if I select this one and move it, we can see what it did. Oh, look at that. It even cut it out. So as we work with the paint tools, we can do some pretty interesting things when we are painting one object on top of another object. So we can see we have the original objects, they're different colors. Same colors will blend together as we work because the colors will blend, and this is why won't blend, is every color swatch that we use, that color information is stored in our color palette. See how we have scene palettes. And we can have separate palettes for each group or character within a scene. Our scene can have a palette, each character can have a palette, so you have color swatches that are just part of that entity. The good part is then we can swap those around where we can change it, modify a palette. So there's a lot more advanced things we can do with color palettes, and we'll take a look at that in a future video. But for right now, just know that when you're working, you do want to create all of the custom colors that you will be using as part of your project. And the good part is then if you modify those or change those, you can update it. So paint behind is a pretty fun feature because now I can go here and we can see how it now sits behind that red or just out of that edge. So if you're trying to create like a little rim light on something and you want it to go beyond, you can do that. So it works pretty slick that way. So that's a nice feature that's built into it. Auto flatten is your friend. I generally leave auto flatten on because when it's turned off, and if I am painting something where I paint, and I'm kind of, filling it in and kind of deciding how I want it to be, and so every time I lift my pen, it creates a new shape. So now if I take a look at all of these objects there, we can look and go, ew, That's gross. Good part though, we can flatten it after the fact. Even better is generally going to be turn it on before you begin. Now, let's get rid of all of that. Something else to keep in mind while we are working is that, let me just make sure it's turned on. Okay, good. Is we have over on the right side in our default layout where we can see our art layers. There's an overlay, a line art, a color art, and an underlay layer. Typically, the ones we use the most frequently are the line art and color art. Now you can disregard this and put everything on the one layer, and these are really 4 sub-layers as part of each drawing layer. So each drawing layer you make will have these 4 layers to work with. So if I do my line art on this layer, so now my line art is there, now I can click over to my color art and I can fill it in with my paintbrush. Now we'll see that my paint bucket isn't, I can't fill that because that line, that art doesn't exist on that layer. So you may view that as like, oh, well, that's problematic. But there are things we can do where we can transfer the color art to the line art layer. That's another thing that we can do. We can make that happen automatically. So when we're using the pencil tool, we can now automatically create color art. So then it will automatically show up on the color art layer. So then we can work with it there as well, or we can just paint behind. So there are certain nodes when we are working with our nodes in our node view for different blending effects and other visual special effects that work better when our line art and color art are separate. It also means that we can view one, work on one or the other, and we can say we want to see all of them at once or work on all of them at once, or we can go to the correct one as we are working. So we can see how the stroke selection has turned. Now the blue line is around the red when I'm on the color. It's on the black outline when I'm on the line art. So it's also going to be useful when, say, you are doing onion skinning, that we can even turn off the color art so that we're better able to just see the line art when you're doing frame by frame animation. That can be another way of working with it that makes things a little bit easier for you. So if we only want to see the line art, one thing we can do is we can go into the layer properties. If I double click on the layer icon, by default it pulls up the transformation. If I click over to drawing, we will see we have those 4 layers available. And I can deselect color art, and now I only see the line art as I go forward. So now if I am in layer 2 and wanted to transform this, I could do that. Move to my next frame. And this is a little bit easier, especially, well, red artwork and red onion skinning, red fill. It's problematic. So by only looking at the color art, the line art, that allows you to better, and well, it was black on the first frame. So I switch to the ink bottle, which colors my stroke. Go back to my paint. All right, so now it's all red. If I turn off onion skinning, we can see there it is. but by having it set up with only the line art, that makes it easier. So now if I switch to the color art, well, we can see nothing's there yet, but if I go and turn my color art back on, then I could go and now fill my color from frame to frame. Because often if you're doing frame to frame, it is easier to do it when you only see the lines versus seeing all the fills, because then it becomes kind of blob-like, making it a little bit tricky to see what's going on. So these are just a few tips, a few things that you will want to keep in mind when you are working using these tools. Auto flatten is great, draw behind is great, and we can see that that's available on both the paintbrush tool and the pencil tool. We have those similar options. So if you do want to just pretend color and overlay, that doesn't exist because that complicates the workflow in your brain. No big deal. You can put everything on the single drawing layer. That is a perfectly fine way of working. So now I'm going to move to a new frame, turn off onion skinning here just so I can. I'm going to just go back to my black, turn on this button, and right here, so it's automatically creating color art. Oh, I thought I was on the pencil tool. My bad. Let's go here. Automatically color art. So now, if I draw that, now I click over to my color art, I can now fill it because it's there. And if I want to get rid of the stroke on that, I certainly can. So now it looks the same, but if we go into the layer properties and turn off our line art, we can see it's there. We turn off the color art, we can see it's there. So that's one way of doing it, and you can have it automatically do it, or jump over to a new frame, grab my pencil tool. So I'll turn that off. So if I draw a shape, and now once it's drawn, we have the option right here so that we can create color art from the line art. So now that color art is there. I can go to my color art layer, grab my paint bucket, fill. If I don't want the line to be on my color, then I can select it, hit delete. Oh. So now we have that stroke that was around it, because if I go to my line art, click line art there, color art there, so we can see they're separate. Now if I go to that color art, so we can see there's a stroke, but it now made that stroke, it's not filled. So that's the how when we're doing this, you can get rid of that stroke if you want. You don't have to. So right now the stroke is on the line art layer, and this. So just to be clear, so the stroke is on the line art layer. If I select it and say create some color art from it, it creates the color art. Wait, oh, it wasn't selected. There we go. So now it created color art. Now if I, just so we can see, we will turn off the line art. We can see there's still a stroke there on the color art layer. So now I can go grab my paint bucket and I can fill it. Now if I Go back in my layer, turn off the color, turn back on the line. So we can see we have line, we have color as part of it. They are separate. So when it puts the line art onto the color, it puts it on without a stroke. It just gives you the path. So then you can fill that path with color more easily. So that's kind of how this is all working. You just need to, at times, do some play with it to understand how you want it to all work. But we have line art, we have color art, and if everything you do is just put it on the line art, your strokes and your fills, it should be fine in most cases, but know that the more advanced workflow would be to keep them on separate layers. But if you don't, no big deal. But again, these are really, they're sub-layers of each drawing layer. So each drawing layer does get its own version of overlay, line art, color art, and underlay. So we get these 4 layers that kind of happen in this exact order so that we can work with them. So this is part of working with the tools, using our pencil tool, using the brush tool. Now if I use the eraser tool on this one, and if I erase right here, hey look, it looks like it worked. Oh, wait, let's repeat that. I'm going to repeat that. Okay, yeah, that's because remember our line is on the line art layer. Now if I go to the color art layer and erase, you can see the line stays, but the fill is going. And this is part of why when you do separate them, it gives you a little bit more flexibility while you're working. You ultimately have more control. So we can see that difference of which is on which layer. And sometimes you'll think you're on line art and you're trying to do stuff and it's not working right because you should be on the color art, or this what you're trying to modify is on the color art. So you do have to keep your wits about you while you're doing this, otherwise you may get a little bit confused along the way. You're like, why is it not working? So now you know. So another feature to keep in mind when we are drawing and painting inside of Harmony is when I draw a line, we have, and just choose a little stronger color. So when I draw a line, if I have a shaky hand, I can use the tool to help smooth out my line so that I get a much cleaner line. And we do that by setting up smoothing. So we can adjust both the contour and the centerline smoothing. So that by default it's at 5. So if we'll just put this back to 5. Now when I draw with it, if I have a shaky line, it pretty much captures all of that detail. Now if we turn it way up, we can see if I draw with a shaky line, it straightens it out. If I draw a circle, it really cleans it up. But we can see that's not working really well. I find that 20 seems to be a much better number to use, because now it cleans it up so that if I have a little bit of wiggle in what I'm drawing, it smooths it out, but it gives me a more natural setting. So if we go back to 5, and now if we bump this up to 20, so we can see, get a little bit of smoothing. I mean, both of these are going to just give you a little better line quality, and it works with both the pencil tool and with the paintbrush tool that we can work on doing a little bit of smoothing as well. So when I'm working with the paintbrush, if I go over onto smoothing, we can see currently it's set to 0. If we bump that up to 20, now we get a little better quality. Now if I bump my tip size up a little bit so we can see it, I'll pull the minimum size down so it's more pressure sensitive. So the smoothing really does impact it, especially the centerline smoothing when you're trying to make a curved line. So if you have a wiggly hand, it's going to just give you a better line quality, so your drawings appear to be a little bit more polished. So now if you're trying to trace or follow your initial sketch, so if I go back to my let's go, we'll set, I like the center line, we'll not go on contour. So if I'm trying to follow a line, I can work much better and smoother, so that even if we switch the color so we can see, it's going to give me a better mark, where when smoothing is turned off, when I'm trying to follow that line, it's very faithful to what I drew, but it just doesn't look very good. So this is why figuring out how much smoothing you need. If you're drawing with a mouse, you might need a little bit more. If you are drawing with stylus, you might need a little bit less, just because you inherently have a little bit more control while you're working.